Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In the Instagram Q&As I do, I get a lot of questions about my photography equipment, and recently have been getting quite a few requests to make a video overview of my gear. I finally had some time this morning to knock out a quick walkthrough of each component with some information about why I use it, in what scenarios, why it works for me. And just a quick background for those of you who don't know, I've been shooting on and off for maybe 20 years now, starting with a film photography class back in high school, which sort of give you an idea of how old I am, which slowly evolved into digital as technology advanced over the years. I've gone through a bunch of different cameras, a bunch of different lenses, shot a bunch of different stuff. While I mostly shoot for the website now, I still do some freelance work, and in the past I wrote and shot quite a bit for Importuner magazine and a little bit of Super Street. I started with Nikon when I bought a D50, which was a very, very long time ago. Then I moved through pretty much all of Nikon's mid-range cameras, D300, D610, D750, D850. I've also shot a few Canons and Sonys before, either renting or borrowing from friends. I have a few of the Fuji X series, X100T. I like that for casual stuff, little trips, backpacking, super convenient little cameras when you don't want to bring a full kit, but you still get really memorable photos. Nikon has always felt the most comfortable to me, not because I think it's the best or anything like that. Every brand is going to have its strengths and weaknesses, but it just works for the way that I shoot. I prefer the ergonomics. I prefer the UI of Nikon's bodies. The button layout makes sense to me. It lets me move fast and adjust settings really quickly. I've always appreciated how Nikon's sensors render color. It's just a little bit more true than other cameras that I've shot with. The tones feel more realistic and natural, not overly saturated, which is something I've come to value more and more as I've developed my own style. My post-processing workflow is also very simple, and not having to adjust colors and tones too much helps speed things up, especially because processing a full event takes a lot of time now. Again, everything that is in this overview is specific to me. This isn't a review, it's not a comparison. I'm not here to argue about which brands are better or debate specs of which camera and lens is superior. I've always held the notion that the best camera is the one that you have with you, and I think people get into the weeds too much with modern camera specs and fighting about brand loyalty or which camera is better than another one. But I don't think you should listen to people who are married to their opinions like that. Usually the ones who talk the loudest get it wrong most of the time. I don't consider myself an amazing photographer, and I'll always have something to learn, but I have developed my own style and workflow over the years, and this particular setup supports that. And it will continue to evolve as I change as a photographer as well. But I think you should find out what works for you and expand on that instead of buying into what other people tell you is best. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at what I'm currently using. Okay, first up is the Nikon Z72. I've used this for 2 seasons now, about a year and a half, having originally bought it to replace the D750 that I used to use alongside the 850. The 850, in my opinion, is one of the best cameras that Nikon's ever made. Getting rid of it was pretty difficult. From a price versus performance perspective, the 850 is hard to beat. If you're still using a DSLR body. But the 70-200 lens I used with the D850 was a Tamron, and it eventually needed to be replaced. And instead of spending the money to stick with a DSLR and the older F-mount system, I chose to invest in the Z72, the new mirrorless system from Nikon, and kind of start making the jump to mirrorless cameras with the superior S glass. and this Z72 was the first step. I shoot with two bodies. I got into it as a habit, shooting so much time attack in Japan where things happen fast and at the same time, and you really only have an hour or two sometimes to get all the event coverage. So shooting two bodies with two different lenses with two different focal lengths is a huge efficiency boost instead of fumbling trying to change lenses on the go. Which kind of was a burden trying to use this camera alongside the 850 because I had to carry around two different lens mount systems, adapters. It just got to be cumbersome. The adapter for the F-mount to the mirrorless cameras just didn't work that well, autofocus wise. The Z72's autofocus isn't that good anyway, but that's a whole nother issue. So eventually, I decided it was time to commit fully to the Z-mount system and slowly began replacing my F-mount lenses with Nikkor S-glass prime lenses for the mirrorless system. And then I naturally started using the D850 less and less. But the Z72 was a good replacement. It gave me pretty much everything that I love about the 850. Amazing image quality, gigantic file sizes. It's got a 45.7 megapixel sensor. Really, really great dynamic range. Which is great for processing. It gives you a lot of flexibility, processing the difference between the highs and lows out in Lightroom. It was a little bit of a learning curve, but after I got used to it, I really began to prefer the mirrorless system from this camera. Like I said though, the one area it falls short is in the autofocus. This body was never intended to shoot sports. By definition and by build, it's a landscape camera. So the processor that's in the 7.2 is called the XPeed 6, and it's really not good for shooting sports. You probably noticed a lack of track photos the last season or two, and it's probably because I've predominantly been using this camera and hanging around the pits more often, just because the autofocus on this camera is not great at all. But then again, it wasn't designed to be great, so that's kind of where my next purchase came in, the Z63, which I picked up recently. We'll take a look at that camera next. Next we have the newest camera in the case, one I just purchased recently, the Z63. I'm pretty excited to use it this year in Japan. This is Nikon sort of stepping up on the Z6 series to make it a true mid-range version of the Z8 and the Z9 without that hefty price tag of the professional cameras. The biggest change here from the Z6 II is the XPeed 7 processor. You'll remember that the XPeed 6 is in the Nikon Z72. It was also in the Z6 II. This one finally has the XPeed 7, which is the next gen processor, and the same one used in the Z8 and the Z9. It's a huge leap over the last one. Autofocus is faster, it's smarter, way more confident in using the autofocus on this one. It's got almost 300 autofocus points. It also has subject detection and 3D tracking, which would keep the subject in focus as it moves through the viewfinder. All gigantic benefits in shooting motorsports. This camera has a 24.5 megapixel sensor. It's stacked, so it's a lot smaller than the Z72. But in the context in which I'll be using this, it's actually a positive, especially considering I still have the Z72 to use. But smaller files means faster buffer clearing, quicker card writing speeds, just a more responsive camera overall, which for a dedicated sports body is good. From the shots that I've taken around the house and local. 3D tracking autofocus is pretty dope, and I'm looking forward to trying it at the track. This camera also has a added bonus of having a ton of great video features, which hasn't really been a focus for me, but as people's preference move towards video, I'd like to maybe step it up and start exploring the medium a little bit more seriously. Plus it's a little bit of a nice change from photography. This has full width 4K, it's 60 frames per second, 10-bit ProRes. It even has 6K internal and RAW option. I don't have any plans to utilize that type of video grading anytime soon, and I'm pretty sure you have to process it on DaVinci Resolve. It's the only program that will accept that type of file, which I don't have and I don't use, but it's definitely nice to have it as a future possibility. At any rate, it's a lot of flexibility in one package, especially for the price. But for now, I'm just stoked to have a functioning autofocus. Okay, lenses. Let's start with the 20mm 1.8. All of these are going to be Nikkor S Z-mount lenses for the Nikon Z-mount mirrorless system. I've fully switched, so I'm not using any DSLR, no F-mounts, no adapters, anything like that. They're all S-glass, and the majority of them are prime. This first one, the 20mm 1.8, I initially bought this because I thought I would be using it quite a bit for volume 3 of ADR, which I did, but not as much as I expected to. This 20mm is good for compositions that put the subject kind of secondary and focus on wider landscape shots where the subject is maybe not an afterthought per se, just not the focal point of the composition. It's very sharp for a 20mm, as you might expect from a prime lens. And it's fast enough for low light. I just don't use it as much as I thought I would. It's good for interior shots and things like that, or if you're in a pit and paddock and the cars are very tightly packed together. This might be good to use to get an overall feeling for the scene. Yeah, I'm not ready to get rid of it just yet. I like keeping it for landscapes and things like that, and every so often I'll put it on my camera for the day when I'm walking around the city or something to try and challenge myself into coming up with different compositions, or kind of get out of my box a little bit. But yeah, that's the 21.8. Next we have the 35mm 1.8. I got this after the 20mm lens actually, and I ended up using it way more. Despite how close the 35 and the 50 are, they're two very, very different lenses. This has done really well as a video lens for the track when I'm not using the GoPro, and 35 seems to be genuinely considered the most realistic of focal lengths in pretty much any case. A lot of people use the 35 as an everyday lens. I'm not ready to do that yet because I still prefer the 50mm, but I am beginning to use this lens more and more with each event. I've also found a good use case for it in product photography as well, in cases where the 50mm is just a little too close. Because it's 1.8, I could still frame the shot how I normally would with a 50mm, but instead of using the 50 where I would focus in on one particular part of the car to accentuate it or highlight it, with the 35 I can usually do that same type of shot but get a little bit more of the subject in the composition. It's also useful when cars are a little bit tightly packed together on a busier day. This gives me a little bit more options than the 50 would. So next is the 50 1.8. I have a Hoya 62 circular polarizer on here. You'll notice I have polarizers on all of my lenses and they never come off. I know a lot of people will argue that there's better use cases for UV filters sometimes or ND filters sometimes, but for what I do in my style, I prefer to keep the polarizer on. If there is a composition where I feel like the reflection would benefit the photo, I can always just rotate the filter, dial the reflections back in or not. But a lot of times when you're shooting cars, the paint reflection really just kind of destroys any sort of lines or body lines that you can see in the vehicle, especially when you're shooting in underneath trees or something that has or like a black paint or a darker colored paint. If you don't have a polarizer on, you're kind of at the whim of the background as far as what the subject comes out looking like. So that's why I run polarizers, and that's why I'll never take them off. It's just easier to keep them on for me, not for everybody. But the 50-1.8 is the lens that I have on my camera 90% of the time. It's probably why everything I post on the website, on social media, has that consistency to it. And if I could only shoot one lens for the rest of my life, this would be the focal length that I choose. If I could afford a 1.4, I would do that. But I don't know what else to say about this really, other than it's my favorite lens. You gotta walk around a little bit more when you're shooting with prime lenses. You don't have the convenience of zooming in and out with a zoom lens. But you just get something different with a prime lens. There's a crispiness, there's a crispy feel to the shot that I feel like you don't get with zoom lenses. Maybe you do. I don't shoot with zoom lenses, modern zoom lenses, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, the inconvenience you get from having a fixed focal length pales in comparison to the end result, in my opinion. That's why I shoot mostly prime lenses. But yeah, the 51.8 is great. And then last we have the 7200 2.8. This is the one of the newer lenses that I have. I purchased it last year for use with the Z72 finally when I got rid of the 850 altogether. In February when I went to Japan last, I was only shooting on the Z72. Again, this lens didn't get much use because of the Z72's autofocus issues. But prior to that, I had the 7200 2.8 Tamron, which I probably put 50,000 photos through at least. But 7200 is a pretty important lens for work on track or in motorsports in general. And going from the old Tamron to this one was kind of night and day. This lens is super fast at 2.8. It's tack sharp even at 200 at full zoom. Newer stabilization is really excellent as well. Background compression that you get from a lens like this is really great to isolate the subject or really kind of pulling out the details in the background. And despite having trouble focusing on the Z72, most of the time this stays at 2.8 for me, just because I like that the added depth you get at that aperture. It was pretty expensive, but obviously it was worth it, and there's really no other alternative for it for what I do. I'm hoping the Z63 will get a lot more use with this lens, but one critique of the 7200, actually two critiques. Sometimes at certain circuits, like Suzuka or Fuji or any sort of international circuit where you have really long runoffs at the turns, sometimes the photographer's stand is pretty far away, and 200 millimeters just doesn't cut it sometimes. It puts you a little too far away. The good thing is when you're working with modern cameras with large sensors, you can always crop the photo to get a little bit of zoomed in there. But and the zoom lens, or the zoom on this lens is quality enough where you don't really lose any quality at 200. It's still really sharp. Yeah, there's really no alternative to it because Nikon hasn't made a 300mm prime in the Z mount yet. I'm hoping they do. Back in 2020, they released the, I think it was a 120 to 300mm 2.8 about 5 years ago, back when most people were still using DSLRs. I imagine they have something similar in the works for the Z mount. But for reference, that lens was $6,500 or $7,000 or something like that. So even if they did come out with the 300 prime lens, I don't know if I could afford it anyway. But I do like having the flexibility of being able to go down in focal length if I need to. Because sometimes 70mm works out great for pits if the 50mm is just a little too small. Yeah, essentially, when you're running two bodies with a 50mm and a 7200, or even a 35mm and a 7200, you have a perfect range of focal lengths to choose from for your subjects. The other gripe I have about this, the second one, is that when they made the 7200 for the Z mount, for some reason they switched the zoom ring and the focus ring. So when you're not using autofocus, the focus ring to pull focus here is here. When you're using manual focus, zoom ring is on top here. On the F mount lenses, they were switched. So the focus ring was up top and the zoom ring was on the bottom. And the problem that you run into is when the hood is on and not being used, the access to the zoom ring is really impeded. So you go to zoom in and your fingers hit the hood and you can't really finagle it, and you don't have too much room underneath to stick your finger into zoom. And typically when you're doing it, you need to do it fast, or it's just altogether kind of cumbersome. I don't know why they did that. It's like, how often, I can't imagine people using manual focus on this lens very often. I don't use the hood that much. I could just stop complaining and take it off and use it without it, and that eliminates the problem entirely. So not a big deal, but it is kind of annoying. And again, got the polarizer filter on there as well. Anyway, you can't shoot motorsports properly without a telephoto lens, and the 7200 has proven to be a great asset over several years. Yeah, so that's a quick overview of my gear. It's nothing too crazy. It's a system that works for me that I've kind of put together over the years. I don't think gear makes you a good photographer or a bad photographer. I think that's something we all know. But the lenses you use and the cameras you use can help you shape the way you shoot, how fast you can move, how consistent your results are. And, you know, eventually if you do something long enough, you're going to eventually develop your own style in composition and processing. Right now, this setup gives me everything I need to keep doing what I love in the way that I love to do it, both at work and, you know, when I'm not shooting for work, if I'm outside or if I'm shooting something with the family. But yeah, I would love to hear what everybody else uses. If you want to drop a comment below about your setup, if you got any tips or tricks for me, that'd be great. And if you have any questions about what I use, my workflow, feel free to drop a question below and I'll be sure to answer it. That's it. I'll see you guys for the next one. Got a lot of requests to go over my actual processing workflow and some of my methods. I'll do that another day when I have a little bit more time and I find a better way to record the screen. But yeah, look forward to that, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.